Well, quite honestly, on Good Friday, I was getting a little bit down. The confinement and all the changes that have happened to us these past 3 weeks were kind of wearing. I was especially concerned about my own family. I have 5 members of my immediate family who are in the healthcare, taking care of people. My sister Julie, who's at Children's Hospital in Toledo, my sister Mary, who's doing triage with healthcare workers to see that they get the proper care that they need as they go through these times. My nephew Matt's wife Mackenzie, who has 3 babies, as intensive care nurse. My godson Michael, whose fiancee Jen, by the way, they were supposed to get married on Saturday, and that had to be put off until late in the summer. And Jen is an emergency room nurse, and my niece Julie is an intensive care nurse at Children's Hospital in Boston, and because she's trained in emergency work, is also working in the emergency room in Marlborough. So that weighs heavy. And I think of all of you. I think of all that you're going through. I think of the concerns that you have, and that weighs heavy. I think of my staff here at St. Luke's and trying to keep the parish going and trying to keep them working, and they do, and there's so much that's happening still, even though we can't gather together in our normal ways. And so we were getting ready for Holy Saturday, and I said to Beth, who takes care of our home, I said, we got to get some type of flowers or something, so she says, well, Ferris Flowers they're closed, and we'll see what we can do. So I walked in on Holy Saturday, and I saw this. With Beth and Ferris and Patrick and Larry, who are keeping the church so clean and so beautiful, so those of you who can come can be safe when you come to visit the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, in the tabernacle, that they worked gathering together silk flowers that we've had over the years, and they put together the setting that we have today. And that reminded me of what this is and what this is about. In spite of all the concerns and fears that we have, the worries that we have about one another and about those that we love, and some about our own personal health, that this is why this celebration of Easter is so absolutely important, because it brings in the face of all of this the power and the truth of God's love and God's enduring love. I was thinking about what it must have been like. How did the tomb open? Was it rolled aside? Mary Magdalene comes in the gospel today, and the stone is away from I think it burst open. I think that tomb was so filled with life and with the love of God that it blew the stone away. And that's what Jesus has done, is he has unleashed, through his gift of himself on the cross, through his transforming redemptive love, has changed this whole universe. Not just a part of it, but the whole universe has been changed by this explosion of God's life and love into the world. And that's what we celebrate. That's what we claim for ourselves today. We claim the victory over sin and death. Now, it's hard to get it at first. Even the disciples, as we travel through the Easter time, we will struggle with the struggle of belief that even the closest friends of Jesus had. Someone will say, I saw him, and will say that, I won't believe that. The stories of transformation that take place over the Easter time are our stories of how we come to grips with what do we believe this world is about? What do we believe my life is about? Where is all of this going? What does this mean? And what I think it means is that God's love triumphs over everything. And if we let God's love and God's life triumph over us and our fears and our worries and our anxieties, then that love becomes a power of transformation in this world. Many times the Catholic Church is criticized for the way it looks at life and the protection of life. But you understand, if you believe that life is this, that life has this power and this energy, that it is so precious, that of all the things in the world that you could have, that you could possess, nothing is as precious and awesome and filled with the fullness of what it means to be in this world and to be alive than life itself, then you can understand why every life has to be treasured and every life has to be it has to be treasured. So what do I expect? I expect that on this day, the celebration of Easter, while we are still in our confinements, as we are still trying to follow ways of safety and care for ourselves and one another, that the power of this bursting out of God's love and God's life is going to create such an energy of creativity. Just like last night when we heard of the creation of the world out of God's vision of what the possibilities that we are could be, that is going to happen. So we might still be at the heart of our confinement, that we might have not quite reached our peak, but what we have reached is the moment when God's creativity and God's power starts working in all of our hearts. And you can see that. You can see it in simple things. You can see it in way a little group of people took together bits and pieces of stuff that was around and created a lovely setting to celebrate this feast. You can see it in the healthcare systems where people are working to not just to find a cure, but to find creative ways of caring for people. I was enthralled with MIT coming up with the possibilities of a respirator with $100 worth of materials, a piece of equipment that usually costs $30,000. I mean, this is the power, our ability to create, our wisdom, our science, all of the things coming together, the courage of people to give what they have, to live the sacrificial, self-giving love that we celebrated last night, to live the transforming, redemptive way of changing the world around us. And I believe that is happening. I believe that if we're looking for anything out of this Easter, we should look for this powerful energy of creativity that comes from its very source, from God Himself. I'd like to just kind of finish up with a little reflection on social distancing. And this is something that happened. I was probably about 14 or 15 years old, and I was up in my grandparents' apartment on the third floor of our three-decker. And my grandmother and my grandfather were both sitting on either sides of the stove. Now, if you were on the third floor, that meant the heat had to come all the way up from the cellar. So their stove also was a heater. And so one of the more comfortable places to be was when you could sit on your rocking chair on either side of the heater. So I must have been doing homework or something, because it was pretty hard to do it sometimes in our apartment down on the first floor with all the kids. And so I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, my grandfather gets up from who had terrible arthritis, is a railroad man, had worked hard all his life, got up from his rocking chair, went over to the sink, ran the water a little ways, got a nice cool glass of water, and brought it over to my grandmother. And she looked at him and said, "Thank you, John." And she took a long drink of the water and then gave the glass back to him. He went over and he sat down in his rocking chair. Now, she did not ask for that water, but she was thirsty. And somehow, through years of love, even though they might have been, at this point, more than about 6.5 feet apart in their rocking chairs, my grandfather knew that my grandmother was thirsty. And I just thought to myself, the intimacy that comes with love, that we might have to be at a distance, but we can be attentive. We can really pay attention to the people who fill our lives, especially as the days and the weeks now of being in confinement and being separated from people around us continue, that we can truly be attentive to one another. We can be thoughtful and reflective, and oftentimes we will not need words. But just like my grandfather and my grandmother, if you pay attention, you will know. And don't be afraid to act on what you know and who you love.